Good evening to everyone. Testing 1, 2. Yeah, I've got green light. Okay, there I am. I hear myself now. I've got to hear myself. Good to have everyone here this evening. It is another great day in the Lord, and we are glad to see all of you be able to come out and we can fellowship together. Remember that tonight is small group Sunday. If you hadn't had a chance yet to partake in that at lunch today, then there are more groups still available. I even heard some people are taking in 2 groups, but that may be that's on you. If you want to join a group tonight, find one out here on the wall and join in fellowship, because fellowship is always greater when we share it with one another and we're able to be with one another, sharing in the Lord and sharing in the bounteous blessings that He's given to us. Tonight's sermon is from Isaiah chapter 58, verses 6 through 10. We're going to be covering some other verses along the way too, but I wanted to take a look at the call to worship that Isaiah was giving to the people here. True worship goes, though, beyond rituals and extends to how we treat others. Here in Isaiah, we see that it's more about the reflection of God's character and His bringing His glory to the nations. Our worship can sometimes be misguided, though. George Barna, he is a well-known religious researcher. He does a lot of surveys among church, specifically among Christian groups. But he wrote a book called Experience God in Worship. In this book, George Barna says that the main reason, the most predominant reason that people go to worship every week is not to worship God, but to have a pleasing experience. He goes on to say that most Americans go to a worship assembly to satisfy or to please themselves and not to honor or to please God. Amazingly, few of the people that Barna's research team interviewed said that worship is something that they do primarily for God anymore. Instead, a much larger percentage of those who attend worship services on a regular basis claim that they do so specifically for personal benefit and for personal pleasure. This is something that has to change. We must forget about ourselves and concentrate on Him in the midst of our worship. He must be the primary focus of our worship. As we look today at this passage, I want to take some selections from this as well as from different passages on what does it mean to have true worship. Because the worship that we do, he says here in Isaiah chapter 58, is the righteousness and the glory of the Lord will begin to shine as a result of true worship. And so let's take a look at this. Beginning in verse number 6, let's take these first 2 verses. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Most scholars believe on this that this specific fasting that he's calling for is the Day of Atonement in the Jewish worship calendar. And he's saying that Day of Atonement, that fasting that's done for the Day of Atonement, this is the fast that he called for, but this is not the fast that he chose, because the way they were doing it was forsaking everything that God had told them to do. Their worship became in vain. And we see this reflected over and over again. If you read through the Old Testament prophets, all the way starting at Isaiah and going all the way to the end of the Old Testament in Malachi, the Old Testament prophets called again and again for the people of Israel that you are forsaking true worship. That you are forsaking true worship because you're not taking care of your people. You're not taking care of those that surround you. You're not taking care of the foreigners that are in your land. You're not taking care of all those who come and are needy. And he comes and he says here in Isaiah 58, he mentions 6 specific people. He said, these are the people that are in need of compassion from you, the oppressed, those under the bonds of wickedness and the yokes of injustice. Those who are the oppressed in your society, are they being taken care of? Those are a part of your community who can't take care of themselves because the government, specifically the Babylonians at that time, but sometimes it was just the nation of Israel, is oppressing them. And then he was said, those who were hungry, those who lack basic everyday things, the homeless poor, those without shelter. Then the 4th one, the naked, those lacking proper clothing. Number 5 is even the most disturbing of this, that your own flesh, your own family, and your own community members are in need, and you're not doing anything about it. And then the afflicted, those suffering from various hardships. All of this is a reflection of the glory of God. God's bounty is without measure. And he called the Israelites to this is what true worship is. And James reflects that. In James chapter 1, verse 27, a religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So he said there's basically 2 things. Don't look like the world. That's the second thing he says. But the first thing is to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. Does that limit yourself to visiting the widows and the orphans? I don't think that's what James is saying here. He's saying what you should be doing is you should be taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. Because Isaiah gives a list of all those who can't take care of themselves. James just mentions a couple. And he says, this is what religion looks like. This is what it looks like when you are truly worshiping God, is when you are taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. And then don't do it like the world does it. Don't do it because you want the glory. Don't do it because you want to get some benefits for yourself. Do it because God is getting the glory through you. He calls us to have an open hand of compassion. Imagine this. You're sitting on the beach, and somebody begins to pour sand into your hand. Which one is going to hold more? An open hand or a closed hand, a fist? Closed hand, the one that tries to grab and hold it for herself. I could grab some sand as soon as it starts to pour into my hand, and I would be done with the amount that I could hold. But what happens if I hold an open hand? If I hold an open hand, then it can continue to pile up as far as the sand can make a mountain out of itself. And then it continues to pour, and new sand continues to be in there. But the closed hand that is grabbing onto it cannot hold anything other than the moment that I decided to close my hand. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 27 says, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is your power to do it." When you have the power to change those around you, are you helping them in the name of God? Do we hold tightly to what we have, the limited capacity of that, or are we sharing freely, allowing blessings to flow through us? Going back to Isaiah, beginning in verse 8, He says, "Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then shall you cry, and the Lord will answer, and you shall cry, and he will say, 'Here I am.'" He says that the glory of that the righteousness shall go before you. What is God's righteousness? He's different. He's different than the gods that were in the neighboring lands there with Isaiah. He says, I am holy, and I want you to be holy also. And what it means to be holy is to be set apart. I'm different than all these other gods. I want my people to prosper. And I'm telling you, if you are allowing yourself to receive the blessings of God and close it with a closed hand, you're not being like the character of God. He says that God will also be your rear guard. He has whatever is behind you. When he's telling this to the people of that time, he's saying that I can protect you even when you don't know that a danger is coming at you. Because I know everything that's happening. And I have already prepared things in place for you. As the nations were there, he already had a plan for how he was going to bring them back into the land. And to prepare them to re-inhabit the land of Israel. And he tells them, I am going to be your rear guard. Then shall you, and all of that is because God desires to be glorified. The worship that we do is a call out to God because he is worthy, that he has what is before us and he has what is behind us and everything in between. He is in control of all of that. And when you call out because you are lacking, he will say, "Here I am. I am ready to go before you." It aligns with Christ's mission in Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 and 2. Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 and 2, Jesus said, "This is me." When he was in the synagogue, he reads from this passage and says, this is who God was talking about. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim the liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn." He says, this is the time. Now, in Isaiah's time, it was not yet the time. But he says, when Jesus comes, he says, this is who he was talking about. I am calling you to be like me. Because this is what I am doing. And when John's apostles came and talked to him, this is what Jesus used this to read out. He also told them, this is who I am. I'm doing all these things. Do you not see this as the testimony of who I am, of my compassion, that I reach out from you? Choose to be like Jesus is. He calls us in Isaiah chapter 58, to eliminate the oppression from society, to get rid of the harmful speech and accusations, and to actively help those in trouble. He says at the end of verse 9, he says, "If you take away the yoke from your midst, the point of the finger and speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry, and satisfy the desire of the afflicted." He's saying, this is how you will know that you are my people. If you take away their yoke, if you get rid of in other words, you get rid of the oppression that's happening with each of them, you you stop pointing fingers and saying it's their fault. Our political system right now is saying it's their fault. It's these people's fault. And you all know who I'm talking about. It's their fault that our economy is not succeeding. It's their fault that we can't succeed as a nation. But God says, stop oppressing people. Or can't we all be a part of God's kingdom? Can't we all reach out to everyone that is in need and to help them? Because if we allow the bounty of God to pour through us, God has no limit to his bounty. We'll finish out in verse 10 with the call that he says. At the end of verse 10, he says, "Then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom shall be as the noonday." He says, light comes out. It doesn't want to be bound by darkness. We sing in our Pew Packers every week, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." But is our light shining for everyone to see? Or is it shining for a select group of people inside these walls? If we only let our light shine inside of here, then we're not showing the glory of the Lord. If we change our behavior as soon as we leave this parking lot, then we're no longer being the Christians that he called us to be. We have a hidden potential in our light. The light, this was a quote from one of the commentaries that I was reading. It says, "The light is there. We hide it under the bushel of our formalism and our worldliness. Divine revelation gives it, yea, keeps it alive. And if we remove the obstacles to its glory, it will burst forth." It's going to be, like he said here, it's going to be as though in the middle of the night, it might as well be noonday. In the middle of a West Texas noon, you know that it's the middle of the day because you feel the heat just radiating upon you. And we know that it's there. But he says, if you do that, if you are like those that I've called you to reach out in compassion to, then it's going to be like it's noontime all the time, because my light is shining through you. In Philippians chapter 2, we have that humble example of a compassionate servant. We see in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11, that Paul calls us to have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the very form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. But what he did, he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Christ's sacrifice is the supreme act of worship through compassion. But what did he do right before that compassion? Right before that supreme act of compassion? He also showed it to his apostles and said, "You are to serve men like this. Be willing to wash their feet. Get in the midst of the dirty things that happen in the midst of their lives. Be willing to do whatever it takes to serve your fellow man." In Psalm 72, the psalmist writes, beginning of verse 2, "May he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. Let the mountains bear prosperity for the people and the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people. Give deliverance to the children of the needy and crush the oppressor." It's that compassionate leadership that leads to prosperity and true worship for God. As Christians, our call to compassionate worship is essential. It demonstrates God's righteousness, and it brings glory to his name among the people. Like an open hand freely sharing sand, we are called to be conduits of God's blessings, allowing his love to flow through us to others as we practice true worship, not just through rituals that we do here on a regular basis, but through active engagement and compassionate acts. Then we become beacons of God's light in a dark world. And I call for you today to be true Christians, to be the compassionate act that you need. If we can reach out to you in that act of compassion through prayer today, if we can help you to understand things, the full nature of God and the true reflection of God, and help to become a part of His kingdom, we'd love to do that now as we stand and sing.